when I started school, we were maybe 4, 5, sometimes 6 Jews in a class of 40, 50. So we always chose the few benches in the back near the wall, so nobody can hit us from the back. Because if somebody hit you, you couldn't complain, because the teachers were anti-Semitic too. When they called you, when the teacher called you, he called you with a Jewish accent to remind you who you are.
Some of the neighbors changed a lot. It was like they were afraid to associate with us. And in school, some of the children made fun of us and didn't want to be our friends anymore. You could see the change.
To a certain point, everybody had the same opportunities. Now, all of a sudden, all jobs that were being held in any government job was taken away from Jews. They no longer were allowed to work for the government. The same was true for many professions. Jews were immediately being fired, not for anything they did wrong, but simply because they were Jews. All of a sudden, you have no income. And in addition to that, they set up different hardships for everybody so that even getting food and getting basic needs for life were difficult. They had what's known as their version of the lunch hour. And during the lunch hour, which was generally between 12 and 2, stores were closed. The Germans liked, and the Austrians liked, to have a comfortable lunch hour. During that time is when Jews were allowed to go shopping, during the lunch hour. In other words, when the stores were closed. And many stores would not do business with Jews.
Father had a youngest brother, that he helped to come to America. He paid for his ticket to come to this country. My uncle was a self-made. He had a very large factory here. And when the trouble started, when Hitler marched into Vienna, he called us the next day on the phone to tell us that he was in Washington working on our papers, not to worry, that we will get the papers. And that's how we came to this country. It took till June to get all the papers and were able to leave Vienna. So we were really one of the very first and lucky families to be able to get out of Vienna at this time.
We had a phone call that whether we know that the synagogue was on fire. And where we lived, we couldn't see, but we went upstairs to the top of the flights of stairs, and we could see the glow in the distance. So we knew that the synagogue was on fire. And also, there was our windows to the streets, to the street, were smashed in by rowdy gangs that roamed around the neighborhood. So, and then in the early hours, my father was taken to the concentration camp.
I was 13 years old, and they came to our house that day. We lived in a big apartment building, and told us that we had to leave immediately and move in with another family. My brother, who was a young man, and he was really a target, he was staying in the streets. My parents said, just walk around and see if there's any danger, then hide in an alley. That's what he did the whole night. So he was not caught, because some of my cousins were arrested, and they were sent to one of the first concentration camps, Dachau, in Germany.
Only there 2 weeks with his brother. They both owned a business together, and by the fact that we had property, we had a very good going business. We also had some property, and my father and his brother, they signed it over to the German government, and therefore they secured their release. So after 2 weeks they were let go, and we could not get a visa, and as early as we wanted.
Okay.
So an uncle of my second mother's brother was one of the pioneers in Palestine. He secured some money which he deposited in England for us to go to England, wait a couple of weeks in order for the visa to come through, and then continue our travel to America. But that was in the middle of July, and we were waiting and waiting and waiting, and all of a sudden the war broke out in Europe.
From the first day when the Germans came in, it's like they had, their whole aim was like obsessed with Jews. The first day they gave ordinances that the Jew has to wear armband with the Star of David, and the Jews have to come, every day was another ordinance. The Jews have to come to work for the Germans to clean the stables.
Those restrictions were right immediately. No Jews can own a business, because there were some Jewish people that have grocery stores. One Jewish family had a bar, and they said no Jew can have any kind of a business. So there was the restrictions immediately.
My family was attacked in the middle of the night by a group of soldiers, and this was before deportations, before Jews were being killed and so on. Although shortly after they were started to be killed in Poland. So this group of soldiers went through our village, and in the middle of the night they broke into our house and they attacked. We had the general store, and we had land, and we had a brick factory. So everything that we had was taken from us. And then, and our land, and then we had curfews. We had to be home at certain hours and not leave the house after certain hours. And then we had to wear the yellow star. And I think for me, and then we had to go to separate schools. For me, wearing the yellow star was a very traumatic experience.
Now the German gave an order that all Jews had a curfew. They only could be out in the street from 8 o'clock in the morning to about 6 in the afternoon. And they couldn't walk on the sidewalks. They had to walk in the gutter, because we were no more human beings. We were like animals, and animals don't belong on the sidewalk. So we had to walk in the gutter, and they made us put us in the star. You see this here? So it's Juden. On the left side, in the front and in the back.
When the opportunity came for some children to be saved by an organization from Philadelphia, and they were willing to obtain 50 visas if they could, in order to save 50 children, even if their parents couldn't be saved. And at that point, I was in the process of being interviewed along with many other children. There were 300 children interviewed, and 50 were picked.
We did not have anyone in the United States to contact, and if you did contact the US, you had to have someone vouching for you with an affidavit saying that they would take care of you in case you couldn't find a job and so on. So my parents sat me down in the stranger's apartment and said that the only person from the family who can leave is I, because they allowed young people between the ages, I think, of 12 and 18 or so. I'm not totally sure of the age. They allowed us to leave because England had said they would take children.
The parents took their children, they took them early on a rainy day to the train station, which was known as the Westbahnhof, which means the West train station. And at the train station, The children went onto the train, but the train didn't leave for a while yet. The parents were standing outside looking at the children from the window. They may never see these children again. And the parents were not permitted to wave goodbye because the Germans said that waving goodbye would look like Heil Hitler. And if you were going to wave goodbye, you would be arrested by the Germans because a Jew was not allowed to wave and make it look like Heil Hitler. So the parents had to just stand at the train station.
Imagine yourself being 13 years old and finding yourself at the railroad station saying goodbye to your parents. And it will be the very last time you will ever see your parents. I was 13 years old. Of course, at the time I had no idea that I would never see my parents again. I don't think I could have done it, and I don't think my mother could have done it. If she had known, she would never see me again.
They had a list of all the Jewish people in the town. And they gave us 2 hours to pack a personal belonging, and they came to pick us up. There was a city, Munkach, that was, I think, an hour from where we live. And they gathered all the people from all kind of small towns, and that was a brick factory.
4 soldiers came to our town and gave the order that all the Jews have to go to a ghetto because they said we were too close to the Polish border.
So deportation started, and they started in categories. People of a certain age, you know, younger people, older people, and so on. And then families were sent. Now, we were never told where we were going. This was kind of a euphemism that the Germans had, that we were going east, and families were going to be taken care of, and the men would work, and the mothers would take care of the children, and so on. But nobody actually knew what it meant and where they were going.
They took a certain section of the ghetto, and we put us into cattle cars. It was like 60 people into one car. There was no room to lay down or to just barely, just because we took all our possessions with us. So everybody sat on their suitcases or their bundle, whatever they had. There was no window. And we went with this train. It was a big train. We went to Auschwitz.
June of 1944, they liquidated the ghetto. Okay. They took us all out from there, and they marched us down to a place where boxcars, cattle cars actually, were waiting for us. They squeezed us all into the cattle cars, 100, 120 people in the car. And we kept them moving for days. And one day we arrived in a place that the boxcars stopped. And well, everybody had to get out. That place was called Stutthof in Germany. And they separated the women from the men. And me as a young boy, right, they took me with the women. And my father and my 3 brothers went on the other side. And my father decided I'll have a better chance to survive with them, with the brothers, than with my mother. Okay? So he grabbed me away from my dad's side, from the ladies' side, and squeezed me with the men. They were hiding me with the men's side. And they took the women away, and then the men they put in another camp. We were there for about 5-6 days. Then they decided they're going to take us to another camp in Germany. It's called Kaufingen-Landsberg.
And I remember I made a pact with God. I said, God, if we don't go to Auschwitz, then I will, you know, and I promised God that I would do some very noble things after the war that God would be pleased about. But we arrived in Auschwitz. And I didn't know exactly what Auschwitz was, but we just knew that Auschwitz was bad. But we certainly didn't know about gas chambers. We didn't know the horror of Auschwitz. We just knew it was bad. So we did arrive in Auschwitz, and we were chased out of the wagon trains. And I remember there was an old man, one of the prisoners from Auschwitz in striped clothing came in. Now, we didn't know what that meant, but it was my first image of people in striped clothing. This man came in, and he carried this old man on his shoulder out of the wagon train, and an SS guard was there, and he said, "Don't carry him, throw him out," and throw out this old man out of it. And his daughter was there crying, don't step on my father. So that was sort of my introduction to Auschwitz. So all of us were chased out of the wagon train, and we had to stand on the platform for hours. And we were surrounded by dogs and just multitudes of people, like you couldn't see the end of it. And yelling and screaming and dogs. Eight, perhaps as much as 9. I teased him around our kitchen table. Did anyone want to, care to, or strong enough to touch his pale hair when gas was filling? And his breathing, I want to be there to help him breathe and postpone dying. I do not want to die until he does, and my brother will forever be 9.
That's when they first opened up the doors, and of course they were yelling, "Raus, raus, out, 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 quick, out, everybody out, out," to form the lines. And they separated the men from the women. That was the first thing. And so everybody had to stand in line, all the families, of course, together. And when we started marching, the next thing I knew, we faced Dr. Mengele, which at that time I didn't know was Dr. Mengele. He stood there, and all he did was point, here, here, here. Never spoke, just pointed, you go here and you go there. That's when I was separated from my mother, sister, and 2 little brothers.
Yeah. They took us to a barrack, and we heard screams. So the people who worked in Auschwitz, they were a lot before. They built the camp, they were there. And we had to undressed, surrounded with men naked. They shaved our heads, private parts. It was unbelievable. Everything we had took away, just one dress. And we heard screams, so we asked the people from where to scream. He said the people who didn't use for labor, I think the right side, the left side, so they have a crematorium and they gas them.
In Plaszow, you never knew how your day will end. When Goethe came out on his horse to check out the camp, for no reason he took out his revolver and he shot people.
In Auschwitz, twice a day, we had to stand in line to be counted. And that's when the first day that we had to line up and be counted, that's when they were just Jewish kapos there. They were called kapos. They were the ones that were there from way before. And when we said, when are we going to see our parents? So they pointed to the crematorium. You see the smoke over there? That's where your parents are.
We slept on a bunk bed. There were 1, 2, 3, 5 people. One this way, that way, like sardines. I never know the people, how they looked, who they are. People ask me. We were so hungry all the time and tired. A lot of time at night time, the SS took us outside, woke us up, and we had to kneel on rocks for no reason. They enjoyed torture. Every few months, or every few weeks, I don't remember, we had to naked walk outside, stay in 5 in a line, and they looked us through. Anybody who couldn't work went to the crematorium.
We arrived in Ravensbrück, and we had to leave our belongings, which I had none of. We had to leave our belongings outside, and we had to go into the showers. And there was this woman again, a prisoner in the striped clothing, and she whispered to me, and she said, "Try and hold on to your shoes." I didn't exactly know what she meant, but we went into the shower, and as I was entering the shower, she came by and she grabbed all my clothing and my shoes. And I couldn't understand why, because I knew my clothes wouldn't fit her. When I came out of the shower, she was there and she handed me my bundle. And that's another miracle story, because I got my shoes. Now, most people got wooden clogs, which created sores and so on. You know. But I kept my shoes, and I also kept my clothing. Now, I had a red polka dot dress, which was not exactly an ideal uniform for a camp, but it was very important to me because it connected me to home. And so the whole time that I was in camp, I had this red polka dot dress. Other people got dresses. Whatever was on the table, they were handed, whether it was an evening gown or a tennis shoes or high heels or whatever was there, you were handed. And if you complained, you were beaten.
We were going to Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. While on the way, somehow 2 of the boys escaped from the train. Somehow they broke open part of the floor and escaped. And 129 boys arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. When we got there, it was very late at night. And we went into the camp. When we came there, you could hear this smell, the flesh burning. You saw the flames coming out, coming out from the chimney. Because anybody that came into Birkenau, 99.9% of the people were killed. They killed 1.5 million people in that camp alone. Now, what happened when we came in there, I told you, it was very late at night. Now we went into the gas chambers to be killed. And a miracle happened. Water came out instead of gas. We got our uniforms back, the striped uniforms. They took it out from there and they put us into Lagerei in Birkenau. When we came there in the morning, they got us all outside. And they tattooed these numbers in our arm. Okay? Here's my number. It's B2858. That was August 1st, 1944, when I got my number.
Stayed. And I don't know how many marched, but I think maybe less than a quarter survived those. So anybody who could not keep up with the march would be shot. If you had dysentery and you ran, you know, to the side, you would be shot. If you tried to escape, you would be shot. And then people just died because they were tired and they couldn't keep up with it. So we marched for days on end. And then one morning, and we slept outdoors or in barns. And then one morning, I woke up, and there were soldiers there in different uniforms. And I was confused, and then I see the soldiers were dragging a man behind the barn, and they shot him. And this was my first image of liberation. So these were Russian soldiers, and they found this guy from the Ukraine, I think, who was an enemy, and they shot him, and that was my first image of liberation. And I had these visions of liberation. We would have flowers, and we would have chocolate, and we would have celebration. Anyway, in the end, liberation meant that women found potatoes and they were able to cook them.
And then in Bergen-Belsen, the last day that we stood online waiting to be counted, because after they counted us, that's when they brought the food. So we were waiting to be counted, and nobody came to count. Nobody came to count us or anything. And everybody was, you know, they wanted to get the food. They were anxious to get the food. Somebody came from the kitchen. Do not distribute the food because it was poisoned. And that's when we found out, all of a sudden we realized that the gates were open and we're free.
They made a lot of mistakes because they didn't realize that our stomach was so dried up, and they tried to give chocolate and other food, and a lot of people died. They didn't realize that they tried to help, but so they took us to, now, after we got free, they took us cool, and they converted like to a hospital. So I felt that my sister got typhus. And I took a bed next to her, and I felt stronger because I got a little food in, and I helped out for the whole hospital.
So we went already together, and we were cold, hungry, so we saw a light. It was a village. We saw a light, so we went towards the light, and we knocked at the door. A woman came out, and we told her that the Germans told us to go. They let us go. So she didn't know what to do, so she went to a neighbor, and the neighbor came in, and he told her to let us in the bar. And they brought us pail of potatoes, and they saw how we jumped on the potatoes like animals, and they were crying. I don't know if they knew already that they heard the bombardments coming, and we heard it too. Anyway, I was there for 3 days, and the American army came in.
One day in April 11, 1945, I'll never forget the day, my lucky day. I was looking out to the crack of the barrack, and I saw a tank with a star by the woods, the perimeter of the woods, going down there and disappear. And about 15 minutes later, people start running into the barrack and says, "We are free, the Americans are here." And that was April 11, 1945. And guess what? I was born April 11, 1930, and I was liberated on April 11, 1945, on my birthday. I celebrate 2 birthdays at the same time.
One of the cousins, I was trying to give her, it was the day that the war ended. We found out the war has ended. So I picked her up, and I was holding her, and I was trying to give her a drink of water and telling her that, you know, the war has just ended. And I couldn't get her mouth open. I didn't realize that she was dead.
Death, stand aside at my liberation time. Death, stand aside. Do not hover by my side. Watch. I leap, I touch the sun. I eat bread and I have shoes. My name, I have my name. I hug the trees and run and hum, am everywhere. Don't mess with me, you bloated creep. You cannot run as fast as me. I say out loud I shout. Enough of that. Enough of hunger, enough of death. Come, people, come and share our new baked bread. And yes, my unrestricted body celebrates.
from my family came back. I didn't find anybody except I found a cousin. And after a week or so waiting, maybe somebody will show up. Together with my cousin, we went back to Germany. And I lived in Munich until 1948, when I volunteered to go to Israel to join the army.
He and my mother were one of the last people leaving Vienna because they needed him for doing all this. But they said, no, Austria has to be also free of Jews. Judenrein, they called it. And they didn't care how much they needed him. There couldn't be any more Jews in Austria or Germany. They all had to just be killed in the camps. So they sent them to a holding camp in Poland, not far from all the other camps. The holding camp's name was Itzpika. I had searched all my life about Itzpika, where it was and what happened. My oldest daughter is a social worker, and she always said, I have to have closure. I didn't get it until 1980s.
We were 10 children, and my youngest sister was 6 years old when we came in. And my mother, I think, was 40, and they went straight to the oven. They put them in the hot oven and burned them. My oldest brother survived. He was in the Hungarian army, and he came home in 1945, and there was a book that the people who survived, and he saw my name and my sister's name in Israel. He wanted to come to the United States, but because we were in Israel, he came there.
To this day, I can't get over the fact that my biological mother's mother, who treated me, you can't believe how well I was treated, because she lost her daughter and I was the daughter's son, you know. So she treated me royally, and to this day I can't come to terms with the fact that she was left behind. I don't think my father wanted to get his family out. That was his prime objective, you know. So I don't know how that, and I was, like I said, I was shielded, so I didn't know what was going on behind me.
My sister, who was in hiding in Czechoslovakia, and she was about 8 at the time, so the family heard that I was home, so they brought her back to my village. And then I have 2 cousins who I was kind of raised with, and they were in hiding with non-Jewish families, and they survived. And that was the extent of people who survived in my extended family. And in my village, there was not one family who was intact, who survived intact. You know, there was not one family where every member survived. At the most, there were 2 people who survived in a family.
The last memory of my mother is when we got to Auschwitz, and I was holding my youngest little brother, who was 3 years old. In fact, one of my cousins was holding her little brother, because my paternal grandmother was blind. So my mother was holding on to my grandmother, and my aunt, who was my father's sister, she was holding my grandmother on the other end. And as we were walking, the people that worked at the train were Jewish guys, you know, taking off everything that we left on the train. And as we were walking, they were whispering, young girls, if you want to save your lives, put down the children. And they had told us we're going to a work camp. So we figured maybe, not, you know, they figured if a young girl has a child or something, you know, so we're going to be punished. So my mother right away took my little brother and she picked him up. And she was holding him with one arm and holding my grandmother with the other, so that I should just walk without holding my little brother. And that's the last time I saw her, because that's when we were separated.
When we left, we had to leave behind quite a bit of family. A lot of them lived in Vienna. They were siblings of my grandmother and grandfather. They had children and grandchildren. And then more family we had in Czechoslovakia, also sisters of my grandmother, brothers and sisters of my grandfather, and they all stayed behind.
He went into hiding in a town in Czechoslovakia called Pressburg. It was a warehouse where a lot of Jews lived without any provisions of any kind, just in order to be in hiding. My mother sent packages to him in order to keep him going. They eventually took a boat which was supposed to take him to Palestine. That boat had a terrible trip. They were lacking fuel, they were lacking food, they were lacking everything. They just barely made it to Palestine, and then they were turned back because the Arabs did not want the Jews coming into Palestine. So the British, who were in charge of Palestine, sent my father and all the others to an island in the Indian Ocean, Mauritius. It's a small tropical island off the coast of Africa. He stayed there for the entire war period. He was there for 5 years. But he was a survivor, even though he had malaria 36 times. This was an island that had a lot of malaria mosquitoes as well as other things, but the British didn't treat him badly. I mean, it was a detention camp. It wasn't a concentration camp. He made the best of it. And he was a survivor.